Welcome to this session, which is organized as part of the University of Strathclyde Engage Week, as well as the Catalyst 2030 Catalyzing Change Week. This is the initial virtual discussion on SDG Zero, where we are trying to create a movement around developing social change entrepreneurs and innovators in underserved communities to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are creating a community of practice around envisioning bottom-up ecosystem approaches to support this cause. Today's webinar is the first discussion session in this regard, and our plan really today is to set the stage on our current understanding with regard to this topic and really make a call out to action to all of you to jointly co-create solutions and approaches for dealing with the cause of creating entrepreneurs in underserved communities. In terms of the plan for action for today, we have 4 short presentations to start with, which is going to talk about this topic from diverse perspectives. I will start first from an academic lens, followed by Claudia talking about it from the lens of youth and SDG. And then Neville will be talking about the current state of entrepreneurship programs, and Rajesh would be talking about bottom-up perspectives for entrepreneurship creation. Following these 4 short presentations, we will have an open Q&A, trying to get your perspectives and clarifications that you are looking out for from our presentations. So if you have any questions that you have for us while we are presenting, please post your questions on the chat box, and we will take them up during the open Q&A session. And following the open Q&A, we will have a short breakout room discussions to look at how we can really collaborate to create these approaches for creating entrepreneurs in underserved communities. So that's really the plan for the day, and welcome once again to this session. So without much further ado, let me start the first part of the session, which is looking at the academic understanding that we have around entrepreneurship in underserved communities. If we let's look at a couple of images, which really helps us capture the essence of what we mean when we say underserved communities. This picture captures the perspective of a family who has been displaced and is sort of trying to live off the streets. The reasons underlying this nature of underserved community could be as a function of economic aspects, historical aspects, social reasons, or other forms of lack of support. So this categorizes a major section of what we know as underserved communities. A second category would be conveyed through this image, which is capturing those communities which are underserved, not because of economic or historical reasons, but because of external crisis-induced events. And this image is a commonplace in today's world, given what we are seeing with climate change effects of floods, disasters, cyclones, droughts, and all of that. And this is again a commonplace reason for underserved communities to be created. So if we conceptually think about this, we could kind of look at 4 key underlying issues of what really drives underserved communities. One is lack of resources, which is predominantly of the material nature. Second is social exclusion caused by reasons such as caste and religion and all of those. Third would be the fact that we have broken systems of institutions which lack social support. There is corruption in systems, which again leads to categories of people being underserved. And finally, it's the externally induced reasons for underserved, which is a crisis events like floods and earthquakes and all of those. And if we look at how entrepreneurs have responded to this, we can broadly classify this into 3 types of responses. The first response is what we call as remediation, which involves actions that address the lack of resources concern. A good example for this comes from the microfinance industry, where we have the likes of Grameen Bank offering micro loans and micro finance support for creating micro entrepreneurs in this process of providing loans and financial resources. Second category of entrepreneurship response is about reform, which involves actions that are trying to lead to more substantive institutional changes. Here, entrepreneurs have worked with marginalized communities like women and socially excluded to change local systems and practices. A good example for this is Bungru in India, which empowers women farmers for providing them ownership about water management resources, changing away from land ownership concerns, thus empowering women micro entrepreneurs in the process. The third category of response is revolution, which is more longer term efforts as it involves actions trying to change the underlying assumptions of the capitalist structure in itself. A good example in this regard is BRAC in Bangladesh, where they have managed to build inclusive markets by working around political, community, and religious differences to develop women entrepreneurs. This really gives us confidence in the fact that entrepreneurs and innovators can indeed be the central piece to dealing with SDG challenges. So the question then is, how can we really create these entrepreneurs and innovators in the first place? And how can we create the ecosystem around them wherein they are equipped to create the solutions for the SDG challenges around them? And that's really what is at the core of what we are trying to do with SDG Zero. To really understand this in a bit better, we need to take a step back to understand how an entrepreneurship process looks like. And if you look at entrepreneurship stages, we could broadly put them into four categories of sorts: dormant, aspiring, nascent, and experienced. If we take a biological metaphor example to understand this, dormant could be about sowing of the seeds. Aspiring is the sprout sort of initially coming out. Nascent would be the budding stage of a plant. And experienced is when we are really kind of getting flowers and fruits from the plant. But if you look at it from the volume of individuals who are engaged in each of these stages from an entrepreneurial standpoint, we see that dormant is the bigger chunk where most of the people are existing. And as we go to aspiring, nascent, and experienced, we see lesser and lesser number of individuals involved in these stages. And if we look at our current state of entrepreneurship programs, we see that most of these entrepreneurship programs are essentially targeting the aspiring, the nascent, and the experienced, leaving out the dormant, which is the vast chunk of these individuals who are there in our communities. So this is a very fundamental dilemma that we are facing, as in we are trying to not invest in sowing the seeds, which is the first stage. Rather, we are more interested in plucking the fruits and the flowers later on. Results from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor Survey echoes this exact thought, where when we look at recent data of experts giving their opinions on entrepreneurial ecosystem conditions across countries, it's noted that entrepreneurship education in schools continues to fail, echoing the same thought that we are missing the dormant stage of the entrepreneurship. If we look at national level startup programs, let's say Startup Savannah, which is popular in Kenya and East Africa, Startup Chile, all these startup programs, as I said, are essentially targeting the aspiring, the nascent, and the experienced. So those are the three stages of the entrepreneurship where they are trying to make their most impact on. But we already know from how trickle-down economics works, which is, it does not really trickle down, wherein there is elite capture and there is there's a stagnation of the resources and distribution at the higher levels of the system, which essentially excludes the underserved communities from really being the beneficiaries who are at the bottom of the pyramid in that sense. So given that we know this, what I'm trying to say is not try to whitewash and be an absolute critique of the existing government programs. They do have a value and space, which is they are good at bridging between different isolated mechanisms of entrepreneurial initiatives. They are good with engaging in advocacy work. They are good with making the regulations easier for starting of new businesses, all of those. So they do have a place in our system, but by themselves, they are grossly insufficient. To understand this a bit better, let's look at how an ecosystem is created. And if we look at it in a very simplistic manner, it's a combination of hard and soft resources. Hard resources are about your infrastructure and fab labs and all of those, while your soft resources are aspects like mentoring and culture. The predominant focus of the government-led startup programs is on the hard resources, which is trying to create the infrastructure, the fab labs of the world. I'm not saying this is bad and the government should stop doing it. As I said, they do have a place. And I don't really blame governments to be focusing on this because these resources are more visible and measurable. And so the governments are trying to make those visible elements of change. But by themselves, without the complementary support of the soft resources, they are found to be insufficient. To give you some examples, in 1999, Germany poured about $1.6 billion into creating a cluster in Bavaria, and this cluster did not really click. Similarly, in Malaysia, they pumped in about $150 million to create a bio valley complex. And soon it was being called as a valley of the bio ghost rather than a valley for biological innovations. And Josh Lerner, in his book, chronicles a number of these examples of centralized government nationalized programs which have failed to provide the necessary creation of entrepreneurs in their communities because they tend to either just focus on the hard resources without looking at softer elements of entrepreneurship creation. So what we really need is a complementary thinking wherein we are kind of supplementing the top-down view, which is hard resources first, to be supported by a bottom-up approach, which brings the softer resources into greater prominence. This will also involve a transition away from actor-centric model of governments and large corporates really driving the ecosystem creation to one where communities are really driving and leading the creation of entrepreneurial ecosystems and innovation ecosystems, which is what we are really trying to support through the SDG Zero initiative. So what do we know about supporting these bottom-up approaches? We kind of have already picked some useful lessons from existing understanding from academic and practice, which includes the fact that we need to be building confidence and entrepreneurial mindsets at a very early stage, be right from the stage of schools. So that's one that we need. Second, it's important that we inculcate a make-do thinking approach. It's often called a bricolage or an effectual approach into how local communities are using local knowledge, local resources to deal with the challenges that are facing in their local communities and use the best use of what they have in their communities to deal with these challenges. Third, it's important that we create role models from underserved communities who can really be the examples and the drivers of change in local communities for driving new innovations and entrepreneurs. Fourth, it's important that the ownership and leadership of SDG solutions is built for the communities, by the communities, and for the communities. Finally, it's important that we have open spaces where we bring in diverse voices from within the communities, get in an authentic dialogue, meaningful dialogue process, encourage iterative experimentation and iterative learning process so that communities can learn through this process to really support a bottom-up creation of entrepreneurial and innovative thinking through which we find solutions to SDG challenges in those communities. So this is what we are really trying to capture through SDG Zero. I'll pause here with my opening thoughts and moving on to other panelists who will bring more perspective to this. And if you have any questions, as I said, we will take it after the 4 short presentations. So please feel free to put them on the chat box. So passing the mic over to Claudia to bring in the perspective from SDGs and youth.
Thank you, Srivas. That was perfect because it really will fundament what I have to say. So first of all, my name is Claudia Hakel, and I work as US chapter co-chair for Catalyst 2030. I'm also the founder and CEO of Social Impact Movement, which is an organization that works with social impact in Miami, Florida. Otherwise, I do stuff related to the SDGs, not only in the area like here, but also trying to understand the youth groups and how they can bring to our society the change that we need. I'm going to share with you my slides. Let me get it here. I think you are seeing that, right? Yes?
Yeah, yes, Claudia, go on.
Okay, so.
But present it, go into present mode.
Yes. Okay, so I'll start with who owns the SDG power. The SDGs were created by the United Nations in 2015, followed by the approach coming before the Millennial Goals. The SDGs is a set of 17 targets, 17 global goals with 290 targets to understand and to follow up a world of prosperity for us and the generations to come. So the first time that the United Nations, 193 countries got together to primarily define a goal set agenda where include rich countries, poor countries, and the whole society. So the ownership of the SDGs is actually lying on all of us, not just one person or one entity. Now I bring the importance. What is the importance of innovation and creation, of innovation ecosystems to solve current problems and address the SDGs? And I'm going to talk about the experiences that I've done in the ground, because one thing that Shriva said, that there are 5 parts that we all need to be together on that for experiencing and implementing SDG Zero. So I'm going to talk about mostly the ones that are involving youth and the groundwork that we have experienced here in Miami, Florida, and through the technology and involvement of youth as change makers. Let's start talking about the work that Catalyst 2030 is doing. Well, me, for instance, I joined Catalyst about 2 years ago, and my goal was to join a community of social innovators that could accelerate the SDGs beyond the local community that I was sit. Now, for some time, I realized that there was this need that beyond the place that I'm located at, I needed to interchange knowledge and culture with other change makers, with other social innovators from other places that are building good things for accelerating the SDGs. I found that in the Catalyst 2030 community. And I found that an extremely interesting space for practicing ideas and boosting technology ideas as well. And I'm going to tell you very soon why I'm talking about the technology as well. So Catalyst 2030 brings the community to a level where we can experience these conversations and we can address the topics related to the SDGs with people who are knowledgeable on the topic and also understanding the hard part that we need to work on. Catalyst is unifying local ecosystems and communities of innovators and social entrepreneurs. So if you're not part of Catalyst 2030, I would say start today your application. Then let's imagine one beautiful thing, because my goal here is to talk to you about how the youth is the real change behind the SDGs. And what is the role and potential of youth in addressing the SDGs? So as I said before, in 2015, the world leaders got together to agree and implemented the Global Goals Agenda, a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. Well, right now, we know that the young ones were the ones demanding change for the ones who are writing the policies. But they alone, they can't do that. Especially the ones who are in underserved communities, who are who are distant from the possibilities of getting the education that will propel them to achieve these goals. Let me talk a little bit about a tiny movement that is happening in Miami, Florida. This is social impact movement. What we've been doing, well, social impact movement is a catalyst for social change in Miami, using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to raise awareness, educate, and inspire our community on taking action on social justice, economic progress, and environmental changes. What we do basically, we bridge the impact action gap. We prepare SDG leaders to transform their local communities while advancing the SDGs. How we do that? Well, involving lots of youth, involving the work with universities as well, involving them as protagonists and giving them a platform, a gateway to voice out, to speak up what they want to see as the change. In one of the areas that I would like to highlight that we've been doing, and I put the picture of these beautiful ladies here. So those are two volunteers who coordinate one of the most beautiful programs, the unique youth-led Miami podcast, focusing on educating the listeners on the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, what they do, they share initiatives. For instance, they have finished the 17th season. I mean, the first season with 17 episodes. We started with them last year in precisely at the day of the anniversary of the Sustainable Development Goals at the end of September, and they roll out every other week. They interviewed the local change makers within their own network and a little bit more. But on the podcast, we're able to see how many young people, how many young ones are doing local transformation and creating apps, projects, new businesses, advocating only in the surrounding community. So imagine that if we could propel these opportunities to other places. So with SDG Zero, what we're talking about is to replicating ideas and models like this throughout different parts of the globe, because SDG Zero will enable the future change makers to act. And let's finalize in what is the role and the potential of youth in addressing the SDGs. I think a very important part we must acknowledge is the role of the intermediary. So the intermediary are these organizations, entities that will be the pipeline, the conduct field for them to deploy their amazing solutions they will come up. And there's a need for social entrepreneurs to become the educators. It's on us, the responsibility to get and to develop a social impact mindset that will enable these young change makers to unveil the youth power. And I will just close with this little a little text that are prepared for today, that the SDGs are also a competition for us, humanity, to achieve the torch of prosperity. Like the Olympic Games need a full structure of the athletes, including coaches, sponsors, and venues to exercise, the SDGs need structures for adoption, research, tools for practicing and implementation. In the Olympic Games, the medals can only be attained by young athletes who, using that professional structure, are able to shape their bodies, gain confidence, and excel in their performance. The SDGs need the same structure. Our youth is ready to go. They need the space for sharing their ideas, practicing their skills, improving confidence, and creating the solutions for changing the course of history. With our youth in the field, the people, planet, prosperity torch can be raised by all of us. Thank you. Now I'm passing the ball to the next panel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claudia, for your perspectives from the youth and SDG side. Over to you, Neville, to talk about the current entrepreneurship programs and how they are.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Trivas for setting the tone of this discussion, and to a really enthusiastic young lady from Miami, who's really sort of, setting the tone out there. And she's basically said in her last point was, you need to be an Olympic athlete. That is so true, as I'm about to explain a little bit more. I'm going to be talking about perception and reality for the next 10 odd minutes. I'm glad that Thomas has already registered my 50-slide presentation. A couple of people were laughing. Yes, it's only 2 slides, guys. It's not 50. I just want to make sure we're all awake. So I'm going to give you a little bit about my background. I am the Chief Executive of MindFit, and I'm the Chairman of Your Passport to Grow, but my background has been purely business, the commercial world of finance, if you like, over 40 odd years. Previously at the C-suite level, employed as a C-suite, and more recently in SMEs and helping SMEs grow, scale, or whatever you want to call that in the real world. Franchising, perhaps, licensing, perhaps, lots of different words used for the same sort of thing. And I was introduced to SDGs back in about 2015, when we were doing some coaching programs for mostly FTSE 250 companies, and they heard this phrase SDGs. Well, frankly, when I heard it, I had no idea what it was all about. So I started to research it. And to my surprise, what I found was that there was an economic and social footprint for every single government in the world to follow. And that's the undeveloped, the developing, and the, if you like, developed world, like the UK, most of Europe, and certainly North America. What I also found was that it was really hitting some high spots. Poverty. Even in the developed world, we have a high degree of poverty. We're about to talk about energy poverty in the UK, and certainly in the US, where energy prices have risen quite fundamentally over the last few months. We've got food banks in the UK. There are now 3 times as many food banks this year as there were last year. These are horrific statements to make. So what I'm trying to do here is to close that perception and reality gap. And in 2017, I was asked by the UN, along with a few other people, to come to Brussels and talk about SDGs. What we thought SDGs were, where were the pitfalls, where were the things that were happening well? What could we do to actually accelerate SDGs? Well, one of the things, and Claudia mentioned it, is that these were owned by the UN and not by us. So one of the first points I made was that we need to expand the ownership. In other words, the United Nations needs to let go of the ownership, and now every individual around the world needs to accept that ownership. And as I've said, there are 17 SDGs, and it's a fantastic footprint for economic development, whether you're talking about a local village, a town, a district, a region, or indeed a government. But then I went on to say that all of the SDGs were making assumptions that unfortunately were just not real. One of those assumptions was that we have an abundance of entrepreneurs with that creative ability and that innovation to move things forward. And I'm afraid that's a pretty poor assumption, as I'll show on my next slide. The second thing is, everyone has a can-do attitude, because without that can-do attitude, you won't have the courage, the confidence, or the commitment to move on to being an entrepreneur and actually staying up at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning and making your project work. So these are the assumptions. And I actually finished the discussion with what's missing is SDG Zero. So this isn't a new thing of today, but we're bringing it to a wider audience today, particularly for the underserved areas of the world, because there are thousands of them. And that's where we need to be building local entrepreneurship, not people that are going to think about a local idea and then immediately go global overnight. We don't need those, frankly. What we need is more local ecosystems to generate local employment, local energy, and local sustainability. It's pretty simple when you think of it, but it's not happening. And we're all picking out, we can pick out all of these success areas, but frankly, there are more failures than successes. And if Thomas would now go to my one and only slide, really. In 2017, I challenged everyone in the audience to prove me wrong, because everyone was sort of, shaking their head. No, you're talking rubbish, Mr. Gaunt, as usual. And it's fine, because I've been laughed at so many times in my career. I'm really not bothered. I will say what I believe, and my belief is underpinned by the results, what's out there. So I challenged them to say, prove me wrong. And we're 5 years later, and I'm afraid they can't prove me wrong, because we've had COP26 recently, if you want to focus on something, which started off with the Paris Protocol, 1.5 degrees global warming. And we are perilously close to breaking that 1.5 degree commitment. Even COP26, they're running around now because COP27 is coming along. And the UK will be handing over the baton to another country, another chairman, to try and prove that this is going right. And I see Shrivas is laughing because he probably went to several of these COP26 being in his town. Anyway, I just want to focus on a few things here. Some of it has been said already, and I just want to reinforce it with a few factual backgrounds. I'm going to pick out the biggest number on the screen, which is 85%. Now, for the last 20 years, annually, Gallup have been doing research globally across all businesses, all sectors, about the level of engagement within organizations. Now, one thing that is accepted by everyone around the world is that the better the engagement, the higher the productivity. So all of the training courses around the world have been focused fundamentally on improving leadership, improving engagement, improving communications, all the things that would improve engagement in an organization. Be a better communicator, talk to other business holders. 85%. Now, I'll ask everyone a question. You can put it in the chat box. Is 85% of the global community engaged, or is 85% of the community disengaged? Please just say engaged or disengaged in the chat box. I'd love to see what people think. Are we getting any responses? Disengaged. Thanks, William. 2 for disengaged. 3, 4, 5. Oh, here we go. 6. Okay, so you're all, did someone say engaged? You're all right. 85% of the global workforce is disengaged. What chance have SDGs got of being successful with that as a basic fundamental statistic? And by the way, you can look up Gallup because it's there every year. They'll give you it by sector, by country, by age group, by everything. They'll give you absolutely everything. Now let's look at the next one, 80%. Now, you might think that's a little better, or you might think it's worse, depending on what's coming, okay? But 80% is the statistic that is regularly reviewed and annually recorded as the failure in startups. 80% of startups fail. And you'll also hear that of that 80%, the majority will say they run out of money. And I don't believe they run out of money. I believe they run out of ideas, strategy, planning, business, all of those things that are in the soft skill arena, whereas cash is clearly hard. So 2 pretty poor underlying percentages that say we are not going to succeed in the SDG world. We're not going to succeed in being entrepreneurial or innovative or making things happen and making it new. We're going to look to the blue and the red, and we'll look at the blue. Shrivas has already mentioned the top-down approach that we have in incubation labs or entrepreneurial labs or national incubation centres. I can almost run out of names that we give our incubation centres because they just keep running and running and running. And interestingly enough, the concept, I suppose, is about 20 years old now. Most of them started as university spin-offs. And what we had was it attracted young people, fundamentally, into that entrepreneurial world and then gave them lots of technical training. How to do accounting, how to do marketing, how to build your own brand, which are all really valid things to do. But it misses the real fundamentals of what will make a successful entrepreneur as opposed to an unsuccessful entrepreneur. And that is the can-do attitude, which is the bottom-up approach. And you don't have to put your head on, do a handstand. It says bottom on the right-hand side, upside down, and it said soft on the right-hand side in red, upside down. So we need to apply the soft skills. I'll call them entrepreneurship, fundamentally, leadership, can-do attitude. That's what's needed to be able to fulfill not just the SDGs, but actually to make individual areas successful. Because there's a phrase that I use a lot, and I say, happy wife, happy life. And that tends to be true for most married people. And the other thing aside with that is a thriving community comes from a thriving business community. And that's really where we need to do. We need to be approaching. We need to be approaching these incubation centres. Don't get me wrong, they should be there, and some are doing a fantastic job. But let me ask anyone the question out there. If one was doing it really well, why haven't we cloned it? Why haven't we mirrored it right the way through the world? And what we found is they've mirrored everything that's been done. The UK has been mirrored by the US. From the US, it goes to Canada. From Canada, it goes to Africa. And all they're doing is literally creating bubbles of technical excellence, but we're missing soft skills. Now, this isn't new. We've missed soft skills in schools ever since I can remember. When I was leaving school, my teacher told me, get a good degree, get a good job. I'm 63-year-old. That was 45 years ago, and it was a misdirected belief then, and it's a misdirected belief now. So we are failing our young people by not developing soft skills. So this is a much, much bigger arena than just an SDG Zero to fulfill the SDGs. Remember, SDG 4 is education. And as Claudia can probably tell us, there is a long list in SDG 4 that we should be focused on, including, it says, soft skills. So I'm hoping this is setting the tone a little bit more. I'm sorry I've bored you with 2 slides, but maybe that's easy to understand. And let's move on to Rajesh, who's now going to give us the pièce de résistance of how we're going to pull all this together.
Oh, thank you, Neville. Hi, I'm Rajesh Nair. I've been an entrepreneur, product designer, engineer for the last 25 years, and for the last 10 years, my research at MIT and at Asia School of Business was on how do you transform youth and children in underserved communities into innovators and entrepreneurs. So this is what I'm back in the US and working with my new social venture doing this. My idea is how do we create 1 million innovators and entrepreneurs? So we saw Shrivas's discussion on dormant to aspiring to nascent to experienced. The direction is correct, the proportions are not. So as he said earlier, you have very small percentage of the dormant entrepreneur, which is pretty 100% of all the people, anyone can be an entrepreneur, by the way, okay, become even an aspiring or nascent entrepreneur. See, this conversion may be several thousands to one. And if you look at this on a linear scale, the current entrepreneurship programs are primarily picking up people who put their hands up saying, I want to be an entrepreneur, aspiring ones, and help them do this conversion, this journey. And as Neville said, there's more than 80% failure because you aspiring entrepreneurs still don't have the skills to build what they have to build. So my focus has been on this end, where how do you take this majority of the 99.99% of the youth and children, and how do you start to that unaddressed entrepreneurial potential and start to change them to believe that they could be an entrepreneur and they build the skills and such. But this, if you can change this upstream transformation, you're going to deluge the rest of it with a whole bunch more innovators and entrepreneurs. So the idea is, how do you create what I call a pre-entrepreneur, somebody with the skill set and mindset and the confidence and aspiration to become an innovator or an entrepreneur. So my research primarily was to see how do you take these folks and start to transform. And I started with what I call, it's a 4-step process. So take what I call a zero or an uninitiated kid. And first step is to make them into a maker. Maker is someone who, how do you teach them creativity, curiosity, and the ability to learn on their own and build their confidence in doing this. So I used to run to, high schools across the world. This is in Malaysia. Get a bunch of kids, teach them coding, CAD, electronics, and teach them how to design products. And because I'm a product designer, so these kids would 3D print parts and make a product that works, and they have to make it in 2 days. And it could be anything silly, but the idea of bringing physical design and mechanical, electrical, everything together to create something. This kid was making a baby cradle. When you put the baby in there, it rocks the baby, but it doesn't do anything useful that solves any world problems. So now, and next step was to see, can you go into villages where they haven't touched a computer? So this is in the villages in India, where you took a bunch of kids and started with, this is a mouse, this is where you type in Google, and you realize that in 2 days they could pick up every single one of these kind of things. And so basic electronics, basic coding. I'm not trying to make them into a master of anything, but how do you take them past this point of fear where they believe they can't learn things? And kids learn so much easier than adults, I can tell you that. And these kids are making all kinds of interesting things. So the next stage is that of an innovator. Innovator needs to go find problems. How do you use empathy to identify problems, to create, use critical thinking, problem solving skills and such. And the last one is, how do you take them into an entrepreneur where you find opportunities, how do you extract value and such. And interestingly, they are all systems thinkers. Maker thinks within the product system, mechanical, electrical, pretty much every product designer, every engineer is a product system thinker. Innovator is a problem system thinker. What's the problem? Who causes it? Who suffers? What's the value, pain of the problem? And entrepreneur thinks within the business system, how do you transform the problem into an opportunity? Who's your customer? How do you reach? And such. Current entrepreneurship programs start here. My goal is, how do we start here so that we can reach children and youth in the world so they can actually reach them very early on and engage them. So this is the one, hacking problems, hacking things, hacking problems, hacking opportunities. But interestingly, what happens is when you start to do this, you start to build an ecosystem around there. So when you go to places and start to teach kids, they start to teach others, and they start to move on and build and bring others in their journey. And the idea is, how do we create this ecosystem? So ecosystem primarily consists of a community of mentors, mentees, supporters, and such, a culture of innovation and support and help. How do we help each other and such, and a center where they have the ability to, they have the machines or materials and resources, they can get together, ideate, and do things. So I used to go set up these maker labs and such. This is the Minister of Education of East Timor, and that's the Maker Lab and Innovation Lab I set up with UNDP, where you brought young adults, taught them these kind of things, then took them out into the farms and fields to go find problems and make them into innovators who can solve problems and use them as the mentors who can change the next generation. How do we go ask them to go teach in school? So you're actually reaching one generation ahead. So these, I've been building these kind of ecosystems in Malaysia and India and in different parts of the world, and or in even in the US. How do we go into poorer communities and start to change them from the beginning? For the last 2 years during COVID, I've been trying to do this experiment by creating kits of maker kits and send them out to students sitting at home and teach them how to do and design these kind of things. And this is in South Africa where kids were learning to do this, and here I'm sitting in exactly the same chair. So they can actually learn making, design, innovation and such even online. So I ran about 100 or so workshops around the world and set up 21 ecosystems, primarily in Asia. Now, the idea is, how do we capture these competencies of learning agility, the self-learning skills, curiosity, social engagement, collaboration and such, innovation skills, design, problem solving, fabrication, and entrepreneurship attitudes of self-efficacy, agency, resilience and such. All these things can actually be built. What I have learned in the last 10 years is we are leaving behind 99.9% of the kids, never giving them the opportunity. And we ask a lot of them when they're too late in their life, in their 20s. Question is, how do you reach them very early on and build the skills? If you want to scale, mentors are the catalyst. Every mentor reaches 10, and those 10 become mentors reaching 100. And early intervention is absolutely critical. You need to reach these children when they're 10, 11, 12 years old and put them on a path so in 10 years they would be far ahead. So the UN SDGs, there are 17 of them. Every single one of them requires an innovator and an entrepreneur to create solutions and scale them. And the creation of innovators and entrepreneurs is primarily what we call the SDG Zero, as Neville said earlier. So the vision of SDG Zero is that there are the solvers of environmental and human problems are already out there, but we have not empowered them or trained them. So if we can skill them in innovation and entrepreneurship, they can be the solution provider for the world's current social, ecological problems and co-create sustainable world. And this is what we believe. So idea is, how do we create a movement which is supported by research partners, and funding agencies that can reach regional organizations in different parts of the world, who can help them create the ecosystems in their regions through funding, local funding, and create these communities, culture, and center in these parts of the world. So, and connect them online. So somebody, an innovator in Africa could be helping somebody, a new maker in Asia, and how do we connect them all online so the ecosystem the internet becomes the ecosystem. So how can you be part of this? Please sign up. And I think Sriwas already put in the link on the chat. We want to create these action circles with people who can help us create funding, find funding, research, regional partners, and program development. We really need to develop this program around this research and reach underserved communities and create nurturing ecosystems in different parts of the world. So with that, that's the goal. And if you please go to sdgzero.org to find more, and this is my website. You will see a lot of things around me, and our idea is to see how do we create these ecosystems. With that, I give the mic back to Sriwas.
Thank you so much, Rajesh. It's really fascinating, the kind of work that you've done across the world, building these sort of micro ecosystems in that sense. So open to questions that the audience have in terms of what we have said so far. The couple of questions which have already come in, so I'll start with them. While if you have other questions, we can pick them up along the way. So the first question is probably Rajesh, you can take it. So this is a question I think from someone in Kenya where they are asking how do you kind of create these community level ecosystems and things like that, and how they can collaborate in the process of creating these ecosystems. What should they be doing, things like that. So what would your thoughts be having done that in other parts of these regions?
So first thing is to create these round of mentors. So how do we train? I'm doing this weekend in New Hampshire in schools where we go first find a 10, 20, 30 people, train them and build a small lab with very basic stuff. It could be as simple as possible, but help them, give them challenges, make them hone their skills. And once they start to create things, they showcase to others, which attracts more other folks to join, primarily children and youth. And then slowly you start to build, they become the mentors for the next generation. And if we need to start to do this, we'd all start with a small workshop there to create the first round of mentors, and then a constant engagement over the next several months to a year, build up this sustainable ecosystem that grows. I can pick up the discussion and give more details later.
Sure. Thanks, Rajesh. Another question, I think this is probably Claudia, because you're working with youth, you might be best set to pick this up. So the question is, like, how do you kind of create youth champions? And the specific question was about climate-related issues. So maybe any experience that you have from Miami about creating youth champions and youth leaders of sorts who could champion the cause of SDGs and solutions.
Yes, I would love to answer that. So based on what we have created as a platform here in Miami, we saw that many groups of youth are lacking a gateway where they can express themselves without being judged. It's not just going to social medias and post something on their Instagram. It's really having a space where they can talk about sustainable development goals, where they can talk about their initiatives targeting climate, environment, society, and their concerns in what they come as a solution. For the case of Miami, we have seen that many of those who were interviewed in the podcast decided to accept the invite for being interviewed with a surprise. They were not expecting that a platform will allow them to speak about their solutions. So they eventually start within school because they come from a background where these schools provide an opportunity for them, either to volunteer, to do community service. But when you're talking about communities where we don't have that prepared for these young future social entrepreneurs, that's when SDG Zero comes very important. So the alliances we built with places where underserved communities cannot have this access. So my point is, the youth need the gateway. We need to build through technology, through creating alliances where with institutions and entities that are already in the ground, and then we can leverage that. And that's the beautiful part of SDG Zero.
Thanks, Claudia. The other couple of questions I got is sort of repetitive to what Rajesh had already answered to. So maybe I think we can probably go into the breakout discussions to kind of pick up on some of these thoughts in smaller groups and then consolidate our thinking towards the end. So Sarah, if you want to just open up the 4 breakout rooms now, and we will allow the participants to choose a room they want to go to. As Rajesh has put up this slide, so we have 4 breakout rooms, each sort of having a dominant theme around it. But then at the end of the day, we will be basically looking at 3 key questions around best practice examples that you've seen in this space and things like that. So depending on which sphere of interest you have coming from, if you want to kind of join one of these 4 groups, we would pick up the further discussions in the pre-court rooms. Thank you, Sarah, for keeping us on time and then kind of closing rooms. I mean, so a lot of discussions were kind of going on. So thank you for keeping us on track there. So maybe we want to kind of just quickly kind of reflect on and summarize some of the key discussions that we had in each of the rooms. I mean, so we'll go in the descending order of presentation. So Rajesh, if you want to start first.
Okay, so I think we got into such interesting discussions that we forgot to fill in any of those things, but the primary discussions that we had were in why, is that why is the school system not letting, what is the bottleneck to this innovation and entrepreneurship transformation in people? And the thing is, and why? How can we do something about the school system? And we had Andre and I didn't get Katie. Sorry, Karen. I only see a K. Karina. Okay, I forgot. I only see K more. Okay, so I forgot Karina. So we were talking about that, and Anna was talking about how some of these kind of things could be brought into countries like Colombia, where she is.
Thanks, Rajesh. Neville?
Yeah, sure. Well, not repeating what Rajesh was saying, but adding to it, if you like. The bottlenecks in the current incubation systems, the top-down approach, where before an entrepreneur is put in front of a potential investor or an opportunity, they have to pass certain hurdles. And of course, some are more ready than others. Some are quicker learners than others. But it's the rigidness nature of this top-down model that I think was being mentioned by our panel. You're muted.
Neville, for your thoughts. Over to you, Claudia.
Afsa was taking the notes. I can't access the notes right now, but I was seeing that she was taking all the notes, everything. We had a beautiful discussion where we acknowledge the need for having spaces where youth can participate. She's sharing with me right now. Yes. Okay. So we had John, and he mentioned about the lack of engagement in Kenya, the lack of education in Kenya. Less than 20% of the youth are familiar with the SDGs or receiving that as part of their education. And then we had the different experience coming from Canada, where they realized that even though there are education on the SDGs, but there is a failure in the system. There's a failure on the system that prevents the ideas to become a reality in terms of the solutions built, because the system doesn't collaborate for that. And then we finally had technology, the ideas that surround technology and evolving technology for unifying and getting these students and these youth together on a more reliable and secure place where they can share specific news and ideas to the Sustainable Development Goals, and even being acknowledged by their action. So with the Canada example, Reliably Me is doing a sort of a scorecard where each action counts. With the platform that I'm building here in Miami, in prototyping right now in Colombia, both here in Colombia, SDG Talks, we're offering a portal for exchanging news and with a chance to become a SDG digital ambassador, depending on how the student use the social media in favor for educating peers. So that type of discussions, so disrupting the economical, we have also the emotional aspect that we had John who said about, was Sharif, who said about that he had a very experience, especially with women and youth in terms of violence. So that there's no self-knowledge, the human part, he was bringing that. the lack of self-knowledge within not knowing one, you're not able to do other things because you first need to know your own capabilities. So it's a very nice discussion. Thanks for our group.
Thanks, Claudia and the group. And from the discussion that I was having in the first group, 2 key points were striking for me. So one is the need that we focus on local governments, local authorities as the instruments through which we could implement some of these SDG issues and SDG Zero initiatives is something which multiple people kind of concurred with. And I think if it's the India's case, it probably could be panchayats and local bodies. If it's the Scotland's case, it could be the local authorities who could be the collaborative partners, regional partners in really driving the initiatives. That was one key thought. The second key thought is the fact that these underserved communities have a lot of stigma associated with failure, stigma associated with engaging in entrepreneurial activities, all of that. So in the process of enabling them and supporting them into entrepreneurial initiatives, it's important that we work on removing the stigma element attached to failure and stigma element attached to entrepreneurial initiatives and things like that. So that was again a powerful human thought, as Claudia put it, to how we need to kind of plan about these initiatives in that sense. So I think in a way it was good to kind of get multiple resonating thoughts on this. So coming to the last part of today's discussion, first of all, I would like to thank all the panelists, Neville, Claudia, Rajesh, and Sarah for all the background work in putting together the Zoom session, Afsa, Narapon, Pankaj, and for taking down notes, Thomas for coordinating the whole thing right from the start of putting us into meeting, putting us together into the group, and then doing all the background work with regard to Catalyst 2030 and coordinating the event from the Catalyzing Change Week side of things. So thank you so much for all the different stakeholders who have ensured that we kind of have an action-packed and an informative session in this regard. So thank you for that. And just closing up with our call for action, right? So as we kind of have shared multiple times in the chat, we are looking to co-create these solutions with all of you. So we are essentially looking for you to be partners in this co-creation process. We have already shared with you the sign-up link for joining the SDG Zero group, as well as reading more about what the SDG Zero movement is doing. So looking forward to you signing up on this if you think you could contribute to this initiative, and we're looking forward to following up with you on wherever you can contribute to. So we have different action circles that we have identified to which you could contribute to, and we are looking forward to your thoughts on each of those front. And to summarize on what we think we are going to do next, this is just Rajesh already mentioned this to you in his closing part, just to kind of reiterate the message so that we are all on the same page as we leave the group discussion, is join us by signing up on the SDG Zero link. At the end of the day, we are trying to identify best practices and document research cases on bottom-up approaches. We are trying to do co-creation mechanisms of building the SDG Zero movement out through a train-the-trainer model. We are trying to collaborate with regional partners like local authorities and NGOs and other regional partners who can really make the change happen in the local communities. And we are trying to create a SDG Zero package which could collaborate with these regional partners to make change at the level of underserved communities, creating entrepreneurs and innovators. So at the end of the day, we are looking at an online community of practice supported ecosystem around creating entrepreneurs and innovators for the underserved communities. And we are looking forward to you joining us and supporting us in the co-creation process in that sense. So thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the subsequent co-creation sessions